Once upon a time, I was invited to a costume party hosted by none other than Scott Hoyer, the coolest kid in my 5th grade class. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember 5th grade as the year that I first began to really take notice of the hierarchy of things. The year I first began to recognize that there was a sort of pyramid of coolness in school, with a few kids at the top and more of us, myself included, a bit closer to the bottom. And I was fascinated by trying to figure out the rules of this game. Was I at the bottom because I still wore sweatpants every day when all the other kids had moved on to jeans? Or because word had somehow gotten out that I wanted to grow up and be a singer like Mariah Carey? Not cool, but a dream I still cling to. As far as I could tell at the time, the most revered kids were the ones who were the very best, the most skillful at making fun of other kids, which made the whole system, theologically speaking, a very particular kind of hell. Looking back now, the rules seem to have been mostly correlated with gender roles and who was the best at performing their part. Boy or girl, male or female. Girls with fashionable outfits were, of course, higher up on the pyramid, as were boys who were good at boy things like playing sports or hiding their feelings. Right? So back to this high-stakes costume party. I'd spent weeks deciding whether to go as a clown or an army guy. I'd gone back and forth until I eventually changed my mind at the last possible second. We had already left the house, but I ran back inside, threw off the clown costume that I'd had on, grabbed the army guy outfit, and got dressed in it in the car on the way to the party. So you can only imagine my surprise when I arrived and learned that this was not, in fact, a costume party at all. No, it was an army-themed party. So at the end of the night, I won the award for Best Dressed, which is to this day the only time anyone has even considered giving me that kind of an award. Now you would think that this miracle of good fortune would have left me feeling on top of the world, but I was actually just as freaked out as ever, knowing that I had escaped such huge embarrassment by the skin of my teeth. I knew that the rules of this game were still not in my favor, even if I'd been momentarily dealt a good hand for the night. And just the image of showing up to that army-themed party in a clown outfit is an image that, even though it never happened, is still so etched in my mind that it haunts me to this day. So much so that I'm preaching to you about it this morning. Now fast forward a couple of years, and I attended a Unitarian Universalist summer camp, where these rules seemed to be turned upside down. There were certainly still some folks that were more popular than others, but they seemed to be the ones who were the warmest and the most welcoming. The ones who invited newcomers into the circle, the ones that fostered connection instead of competition. This was a place of genuine love. If you found places like that in your own life, would you say out loud right now, genuine love?
Genuine love.
I remember wondering, how does a place like this even happen? How do these camp counselors find all of the nicest people in the country and bring them to the backwoods of Illinois for a week every August? One conversation that perhaps explains the how of it has stuck with me. I was on a long walk with a new friend of mine, and I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but at some point I basically bragged to him that someone who we were both close with had given me a friendship bracelet instead of him. Now we all know that in the social currency of hippie love camp, friendship bracelets are like the gold standard, right? So here I was enjoying this person's company, really enjoying his company, and then saying this awful thing to him about who was closer friends with who. What I thought I knew about friendship was some kind of boxing ring mentality, thinking that whoever throws the best punch wins. But my new friend responded to my unkindness with love. And he did it in a way that I literally did not know was possible. He made eye contact with me, and he smiled, and he said how glad he was that I was finding a home here. This was a person of creative love. If you've had people like that in your own life, will you say out loud right now, creative love?
Creative love.
Whatever nonsense I'd learned about the social hierarchy, and whatever awful lessons I had internalized about how men are supposed to speak to each other, I saw for at least that moment for the ridiculousness that it was. When I showed up believing that competition and put-downs would get me somewhere, he showed up with a love that dismantles the status quo. Now is the moment of magic, and here is a blessing. He had literally loved the hell out of me. Friends, the history of Unitarian Universalism might, perhaps, be described as a 2,000-year debate on the meaning of Christmas. It's gotten complicated over the years, with some factions claiming that baby Jesus was God himself, others only that he was the Son of God, eventually some more powerful saying that they were of the same substance, in whatever the Latin version of that is. Some of them along came and said, well, maybe he's just a manifestation of the divinity that is already within each of us. And some all along have declared that the whole thing is surely just a myth. But the consistent through line of a Unitarian Universalist Christmas has been the recognition of hope in the possibility of every newborn child, and the comfort and the challenge of genuine love that every child might teach us. There is power in the story that says, in a time of empire, in the kingdom of Herod, a small community of hope might gather around a newborn baby. And in a time of state violence and a broken justice system, if you can imagine it, this child might grow up to mentor us in the ways of genuine love. Love that is demandingly inclusive, love that comes in rainbow colors. That this child might grow up to manifest this love on earth as it is in heaven. If we have any hope for building the kind of world that we want to live in together, the kind of world that we've envisioned in our hearts and articulated in our principles, we need to seek out those mentors who love us enough to meet us where we're at, and love us enough not to let us stay there. And then we need to go out in the world and be that person for others. Nobody but nobody can make it here alone. Many years ago in college, my first semester in college, I attended a weekend-long training for street medics, those volunteer activists that provide first aid to protesters wounded at mass demonstrations. I learned a lot of useful things for first aid that have stuck with me, but most of all, I always have remembered our opening introductions and check-in. It only took about 20 minutes, but we each went around the circle and were asked to share our name, where we were from, and what gender pronouns we used, whether we wanted to be referred to as he or she or they or something else. All my life, people had read my gender in somewhat complicated ways, but this was the first time at 18 years old that I'd ever been explicitly given the option of identifying as I wanted, as felt right to me. No one had ever asked before. Going on to learn the stories of transgender people in my life and in reading, I began to recognize through their example that even while I continued to identify as male, I began to see how the multitude of behaviors and thoughts and feelings and preferences that make me the unique person I am have been carved up and placed in these narrow boxes of gender, boy or girl, male or female. The invitation to share my pronoun was a gift. You don't have to call yourself by what the rest of the world has always called you. You can show up in this place as you are, no costume required. Now is the moment of magic, and here is a blessing. There are few among us for whom the made-up story of gender has not limited our understanding of who we are or who we might be. I recently heard a story about basketball star Wilt Chamberlain, who, despite being one of the greatest basketball players of all time, if not the greatest, was terrible at shooting free throws. Now, free throws are the only time in a basketball game where you get to stand right in front of the basket and make a shot without anyone in your way. But Chamberlain only made an atrocious 40% of these shots. Except for one game which was in fact the highest scoring game of all time, he scored 90% of his free throws. And the difference in this one game, he was shooting underhand from between his legs. I learned in junior high that this was called granny style, perhaps inappropriately. But it turns out that this is a much better way to shoot free throws. At the end of the game, though, Chamberlain went back to throwing overhand and went back to missing. And the only reason he ever gave for going back was that throwing underhand made him feel like a sissy. To the greatest basketball player of all time, the only thing more important to him than the game he dedicated his life to, more important than his career, more important even than being a good teammate, was not looking like a sissy. I wish that he had had a summer camp friend like mine, or a progressive faith community like yours, who, if we could have not loved the hell out of him, we could have at least loved the bad free throwing out of him. Religion ought to be the place where we dismantle the boxes that have been placed over us and locked down around us. If you agree, would you say dismantle the boxes? Dismantle. Religious community should be a place of love that comes in rainbow colors. Dear ones, there are those of us who were raised as boys, and we were educated into this masculinity. We who call ourselves men have sometimes chosen misguided understandings of status over our relationships. We were taught to sometimes choose image over authenticity, speaking instead of listening, and objectification instead of real connection. Fellow men, if that describes some piece of your own story, as it certainly does mine, will you commit with me to building beloved community that sets our relationships ahead of the false idols of status and power? If so, fellow men, would you say I do?
I do.
Thank you. And so similarly, for those of us educated into the myth of whiteness, we have too often learned to value comfort over justice, individualism above community, and intellectualized empathy in place of gut-level transformation, when transformation is what we are so badly in need of these days. Fellow white folks, at a time when our country continues to separate families of color at the border and in detention centers across the country, at a time when we continue to separate families through a system of mass incarceration targeting people of color, will you join me in recommitting to moving through re-education and recommit to loving justice, not just as an idea, but as a new way of life? Fellow white folks, would you say I do?
I do.
Thank you. Those of us of all different kinds of identities have all different kinds of commitments to be making if we're going to build the kind of world we want to live in, because nobody but nobody can make it here alone. In Canada, a couple years ago, a particularly concerning video went viral online. The video was a conservative white religious woman rapping about how transgender people shouldn't be able to use the bathrooms for which they identify. That's right, I said rapping. This video is offensive on multiple fronts. An 11-year-old Unitarian Universalist friend of mine saw that this video was making the rounds online and making headlines across the country, and he wanted to respond because he grew up in a Unitarian Universalist community, and so it had never occurred to him that religion would be used for discrimination. That's sweet, huh? As someone who himself identified as gender creative, for him, his Unitarian Universalist community had been the first place where he was totally accepted without reservation. So he organized his mom and then dozens of congregations from across Canada, Unitarian Universalists who came together to make a new video, a video sending messages of love and support to the trans community, and proclaiming the role of religion in celebrating our full humanity regardless of gender expression. Now, when Anthony's mother perhaps legitimately expressed concern about him as an 11-year-old, a gender-creative person posting a permanent video online speaking out on this controversial issue, she said, "Some people out there will hold this against you." But Anthony responded, "Right, Mom. That's not a reason to be quiet. It is a reason to speak up." Now is the moment of magic, and here is a blessing. Friends, as a white guy with a middle-class background, I sometimes feel like I showed up wearing just the right costume to this party. It means that by some accident of fate, things around me can look more equitable than they are, or my community can appear safer than it is. I need people like Anthony, people like my summer camp friend to mentor me, to show me the ways of beloved community. Would you say beloved community?
Beloved community.
Friends, we came today for a story of reversals, a story of bravery where strong and gentle people win and the powerful and violent go down to dust. We came here for healing in a broken world and not for an assurance of safety. Friends, we've come to the right place. Let us love one another too much to leave ourselves unchanged. I invite you to join me in seeking out those mentors that can show us the better way that we did not know was possible, so that together we can find the moments where we can change the rules of this game. Would you say change the rules?
Change the rules.
Where we've been limited by made-up stories of race and gender, where we recognize those systems of oppression and violence surrounding us and also within us. Let's dismantle the false binaries wherever we find them and build bridges instead of walls to justice and equity and compassion. Would you say bridges, not walls?
Bridges, not walls.
And in our prayers and our words and in our faithful action, let's go forth together in love to build the world that we know is possible on earth as it is in heaven. Would you say love?
Love.
May it be so. You already know the first half of our closing song, "Where you go, I will go," loving. Let's sing it together. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. Again. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. Second half goes like this. For your people are my people. know, we've chosen each other. We've built a family together. And I am going to follow you. I'll travel with you. Your God is my God. Your people are my people. In Unitarian Universalism, we don't have a creed, but we believe in a covenantal faith where we come together to agree on how to be together. We come together to decide how we shall travel together through the joys and sorrows, facing the injustices around us. So I invite you into that spirit of covenant that lights this place up, and we'll sing together. And I invite you to sing in whatever way works for you. If the words elude you and you just want to hum along, that's just as good. If you want to be silent and just soak in the sound of the room, that's just as well. If you want to rock out like you're alone in the car with the radio, this is your time to do it. Ready, where you go. Here we go. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. Where you go. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go. We love you. Where you go, I will go with genuine love. Would you say genuine love?
Genuine love.
Love that disrupts, love that alters the status quo, love that surprises us. May we go forward with creative love. Would you say creative love?
Creative love.
Love that meets us where we're at but does not let us stay there. Love that calls us together into community to do together what we cannot do alone. Love born in the mystery of darkness and turning towards the light. Let us go forth in love and go in peace and go and be blessed as you are a blessing to us.